Hello and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. I had to reset there. I got stuck on the W. I'm James Jones. I'm joined today by Mr. Guillaume Vayette.
Hello.
Mr. Greg Leahy.
Ahoy, hoy, everyone.
And the Iron Man has rusted away to nothing. John Lindemann is not here this week. The Iron Man streak ending at, 4? I don't know.
Yeah, it was pretty short.
Yeah. I don't know. We could call him the Tin Man, but he'd probably hate that. So I'm going to call him the Tin Man for now. This is episode 876, and it is May 23rd, 2024. That gives you all the context you need to figure out when this episode happened in the timeline, both relative and exact. If you really have to know, it's 9:40 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Now you have all the info you could possibly want. So we are going to hit new business. Yeah, we'll start with new business. We'll deal with some of the news later today. So, Guillaume, would you please tell us what you have been playing?
Sure. So I finished that game that I talked about last week, For a Vast Future, a game on the Switch that is basically aping or emulating or homaging or whatever you want to call it. Basically, the Final Fantasy Legend series on the Game Boy. In terms of looks, anyway, the same type of tiles and the characters, the little characters that walk around on the world map, they look very much like the Saga games on the Game Boy. In terms of the gameplay, it was different. I probably went into too much detail trying to explain the combat system. It's not that deep. It's not that interesting, but it got the job done. And essentially, I'm still really happy about it. So that's good. It was a short and sweet game, despite the clock seemingly telling me that I played it for 169 hours. Unless it was saying 169 minutes, which would make more sense. Or it was just bugged. And it felt like it took me 4 or 5 hours, probably. I feel like 169 minutes seems too short, so probably a bug. And they show you your completion percentage, like it's an RPG, but it's a pretty compact one. There's a few secrets that you can mostly find at the end. If you go back and talk to NPCs, they might tell you some new things, and some of them, like in old dungeons, you might find some new stuff. So there's that. I got 97%. I did some of that optional stuff, not all of it. I'm not sure if I want to hunt down for that stuff. I haven't even tried to look for an FAQ. I feel like this game is 2 years old, but I'd be surprised if someone made a guide for it. But yeah, I don't know. I really liked it. It was really well done. It's a game that I cannot, I guess, recommend for everyone. This was so specifically targeted for me. A guy who basically started learning English trying to decipher Final Fantasy Legend 2 on the Game Boy, and played it for months and months and months, and replayed it, and played the Final Fantasy Legend 3 after that, and I never found back in the day the first game, and I haven't gotten around to playing it now. But yeah, basically I grew up with the specific series that this is referencing, and so this was kind of laser targeted. This was a game for Guillaume. This hole is for me, etc. And now I went into the hole and I've emerged the underside, all deformed like that Kenji Ito story, but very pleased with the experience. So that's For a Vast Future. I'd recommend it to all the sickos out there who have the exact same history and experience as I do. So yeah, all three of you enjoy. And at the side of that, I've been playing with Karen a game called Huntdown. One word. And this is not a new release. I haven't pulled up the Wikipedia page, but it's at least a year old. Several people, when I talked about it on the Discord, several people had already played it. They were familiar with it. So this is not a hidden gem or anything, but I hadn't really heard about it before I started playing it, basically. It looks like it should be kind of a run and gun kind of, 2D side-scrolling co-op run-and-gun game, a little bit like a Contra game, but it's not. It's way more, not considered, but like way more slow than that, like way more find, cover, pick out enemies one by one, like try to, to be careful going across the stage. It's very difficult, and it's got the same kind of recede into the background dodge, like bullet dodge mechanic that an old game like Blackthorn had. I don't know if you're familiar with that game. Basically, it's a game that I played way back in the day on the Super Nintendo. It's on the Blizzard Collection on the Switch. Yeah. Anyway, so Huntdown, like it's probably a very slow game when you're playing it solo. But I'm playing it with Karen, and when you're playing it co-op, you can just basically revive each other when one of you dies. So you can revive someone. You start with 5 units of health, and when you bring someone back to life, they get 3 bits of health back. So it's pretty generous, and so that makes it so that when you're playing co-op, like you rarely get the game over, or you rarely start back to the last checkpoint. Like you can just keep going because you can just keep reviving each other as long as you can pull that off. And so a lot of people on the Discord were like, yeah, I was disappointed by this game. It's not, I wanted a run and gun, and it's not really what this is. But when you're playing co-op, it kind of is a run and gun. Like we're not all that careful, and we just like rush into all the mines and the grenade launchers, all that stuff, and like we still make progress. It's a fun game. Like it's very much. Again, I didn't set out to play a bunch of games with that theme, but it is very much an 80s action movie inspired game. Very much in the vein of all those vigilante movies or all those sci-fi movies, like lots of RoboCop references, Running Man, yeah, like literally like the RoboCop bit with the guy just like melting from being in the chemical solution, like is in
the
there,
toxic waste thing in the junkyard or wherever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's in there. Terminator references, like all that. There are, I'm not sure, there's at least like 20 levels. Basically, there's 4 or 5 worlds, or 4 or 5 sets of levels. Each of those sets has at least 4 levels, and every level has a boss or a sub-boss. So it feels like a lot of content, and like the sub-bosses, they're not any different from the actual bosses. Like maybe the actual bosses have a bit more elaborate set pieces, like they might be like in a helicopter, throwing barrels at you or whatever, but they're all very challenging. They're all very like a reference to something. Again, like I might not even be getting all the references in this game, and yeah, like it's really well done. It's got that kind of a retro-ish art style. Like it's definitely pixel art, and I like the vibe. I like the music. It's very much again like it's maybe not Blade Runner-esque, but almost with the synthesizers. And you've got. I'd say one of the weak points is like the characters that you play as, because they're not all that interesting. You're playing a bunch of bounty hunters, and you're going on missions to take out these crime kingpins. And there's like 2 guys and a woman. I don't remember the names of the. Oh yeah, so one of them is a regular guy with a metal jaw. He's not. I can't pinpoint exactly what action movie cliche he's supposed to represent. You've got a kind of a less interesting RoboCop, like, some sort of robot called Mo Man or Mao Man. I don't know. He's not all that interesting. And then you've got the woman who might be the funniest but one of the bunch because she's so ridiculous. Her name is Anaconda. And at some point, Karen just burst out laughing when like we started a level and her character just shouts like, "I hate men." It's very over the top. Like every level, basically, you just start by driving into it, getting out of your cars, like usually like causing an explosion or two, or like running over a bunch of random thugs, and then like you set out on the level and you start shooting. It's I don't know. It's somehow like Karen is enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. It is like, despite the fact that it's probably much easier co-op than solo, it is very challenging, and it's kind of a little bit exhausting to keep dying and like hoping that your partner is going to be able to revive you. So usually like we play 2 levels at a time, and then we're like, well, that was enough of that. That wasn't it. Like we're enjoying it very much, but it's kind of like yeah, it's a little bit exhausting in a weird way. And yeah, I don't know. Like it's really well done. I'm enjoying the vibe of it, I guess, and we're almost done with it. Like the end is in sight. I think we've got 1 set of levels to go. But yeah, like I would recommend it. Probably, if you can play it co-op. Solo, I haven't attempted it. We're playing on easy. We're having a tough time, so there's that to keep in mind. Like you're not getting an easy game here. But it's really well done, and we're enjoying it. So yeah.
Cool.
That's Huntdown. Yeah.
Huntdown, 1 word.
1 word.
Cool. All right. I have been poking at a few things, but I'm gonna do a double back on my new business from last week. So I edited last week, and as I was listening, I was like, boy, I didn't really say very much. I just kind of flippantly gave Star Wars Jedi : Survivor a quick like, yeah, it's a game. It's like the last one. Blah 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 bye bye. And I don't feel like that did it any favors. Like I flippantly was like, they played Dark Souls, which yeah, they did play Souls games. It's obvious, but there's more to this game than that. And there's some stuff that I think Nintendo fans would appreciate. So both of this game, if you haven't played either of them, Fallen Order and Survivor, are Metroidvanias, 3D third-person Metroidvanias with a lot of acrobatic platforming. So already there is at least a little bit of Prime DNA in place here. So as Cal Kestis, he was I think he reached Padawan stage when Order 66 was executed, and has basically been living in hiding as he grew up. And was essentially forced back into active duty, pun not intended. And he is essentially reconnecting with all the training he had as a child in the first game. And in the second game, he's advancing himself as an actual Jedi. In the first game, he's really just trying to... It had been like 10 years since he had any training. He had essentially shut himself off from that because of being... he fought in the Clone Wars as a child. So he was a literal child soldier. And watched his master get killed during Order 66. Which is when all the Jedi got purged, if you are unfamiliar with the canon. So he basically just sealed all that away from himself. So that the very first game is really just him learning how to do stuff that he was doing as a child. The second game is him advancing to the point where he is an effective Jedi. And so he gains a lot of powers as he goes. Either he remembers something, or he has like a flashback to a previous training experience he had with either his master or a couple other Jedi he encountered over the course of his life. And so he gains extra locomotion. So he gains a double jump in the first game. In the second game, he still has it. But in the second game, he gets an air boost, an air dash. So you can jump, air dash, jump. You can jump, jump, air dash. You can air dash, jump, jump, all that kind of stuff. He has a wall run. Because this, again, I mentioned, this is made by Respawn, who made, I'm blanking on the name of the series now. Titanfall, which wall running was all the rage in Titanfall. It was a big thing. It's got a grappling hook, which will make Dr. Metz very happy. In fact, I saw him playing this game a couple days after the episode came out, so he should be in a good place there. But also, you've got a little robot friend, BD1, who is a bipedal, kind of walks like a chicken, but it's got a reversed leg, so that the knees bend behind it instead of in front, and it's cute. It's meant to be very cute. He's very animated. He fills the R2 role for Cal. You know, he's kind of comedy character, but he's really just meant to be kind of a cute companion for Cal. He's got lots of attitude. He bleeps and bloops at you, as they say in the canon. He speaks robot binary versus regular binary. I don't understand. But he is very marketable, evidenced by the fact that in the Star Wars area of Disneyland, they've actually built robots that walk like BD1 and can dance and jump and do stuff, which is really hard because bipedal robots are really tough, especially when they walk on reverse kneed legs like a chicken, like with a big heavy head. It's kind of nuts. So this is a very marketable creature they have created, because all Star Wars content in the modern era has to have a marketable sidekick that you can turn into toys. But he gains new skills that allow him to do things like hack open doors, or you get this like goo that you can spray that will have effects and clear out stuff when you get it to an energy source. So he gains powers, Cal gains powers, and as a consequence, you can go to more places. And as you get to stuff, you can unlock shortcuts. Dark Souls has a very similar mechanic. I mean, obviously, Metroid games have had this mechanic where it's like, oh, you finally finished this long, arduous climb. If you cut this rope, a rope will drop down, and you can just bypass that whole climb next time you want to do it. Just grab the rope and climb up. Stuff like that. Or there are doors that you can only open from the inside, so you have to work your way around to them. And then once you open them, they're open forever. There's some elevators that do the same thing. But you get this big 3D map, and you're told roughly where to go. Most of it's not filled in every time you land on a new planet. And then you just start moving, and you start exploring the space. And you might get quests from people you meet. They might say like, hey, I saw this weird chamber with a door I couldn't open down in the valley. Well, that's one of this old High Republic era Jedi training chambers. So Cal, who is still trying to complete his training despite not having a master anymore, goes and seeks those out. It's a quest that shows up on your map. And as you kind of go through the map, the game maps itself out. You might get like a gray outline of a space before you go there. Once you go there, you can actually see it. Areas you haven't pass through, there's like a big yellow like highlight around the entranceway into that area, even if it's an open space. Like if there's two sections of open space, there'll be a big yellow highlight to show that you haven't crossed that threshold yet. You should go over there and explore. Doors and objects you can't interact with show up in the map as red, and when you get whatever the relevant power is, they turn green. Which gives you a visual indicator that there's something that you can now go explore over there. You should go take a look at it. And this game has lots of like hidden areas that you can't access. I beat the game. So the main planet in this game, I beat at about 80% exploration. I went back last night and poked at it, got it up into about 90, which I found a whole area I hadn't seen before. Just following the guide posting on the map. Metroid Prime 4, when it's more than just a number in space, could stand to take a look at this game. At least take a look at its map, to how it really highlights, like, hey, you should go back and look at this thing. This area has something for you now. Or you look at the map and go like, I don't know how to solve this. And the map will just tell you straight up it because it's in red. You can't. Stop trying to figure it out. Come back later. This is not for you. The Dark Souls stuff I talked about, I want to give more context than just saying they play Dark Souls. There are enemies that wander around. This particular planet is in the hands... Well, it was originally a mining planet staffed by prospectors from all over the galaxy. Very, like, Old West-styled planet. There's a mix of, like, Old West and, like, early 1900s Australia. It's like kind of a mix there. but it's been overrun by this band of organized crime who have basically they essentially extort people for money. They call them the Raiders. They're not like mafia. They're more just a militia, and they have stumbled across a old Trade Federation ship. I can't remember what those they're big floating orb ships, and essentially raided it for battle droids and relevant Trade Federation technology. So that's one army kind of traipsing around the planet that you'll just encounter randomly. Like you'll hear them coming because they're always fucking talking. And then later in the game, Cal is a wanted terrorist by the time of the second game because there's a big time gap. And so the Empire is essentially looking for him, and they show up. And so then you start encountering Imperial forces on the planet. And as the game goes on, they fan out. Early on, you just encounter them near where they landed. Later in the game, they are actively everywhere. And they will fight the local fauna, or they will fight these raiders when they run into each other. And they'll yell at each other, and you'll hear them having their dumb fights. They'll kill each other, too, which is very nice. But Cal basically traipses through the map trying to avoid these fights as best he can, and will occasionally encounter these big strong enemies. Like I fought a Rancor at one point. I literally was pulled into a Rancor trap because I'd raided one of these raider bases, and they pressed a button, and I was now in a pit with a Rancor. Again, it's fan service, but there is this, like, this was very early in the game for me because I did the thing I do in Xenoblade games, which if you like Xenoblade X, there's a lot of that here too. Where I immediately say, that's the main quest, bye. And just start trying to explore as much of the world as I can. And I basically entered the Raiders base, something that's like a mid to late game mission, and just started fucking wrecking shop. And I got fed to a Rancor, which sucked. Throughout the map, there are save points. These are, they call them meditation points. It's spots where Cal can sit down and meditate, and he can spend the points he's accumulated by leveling up on various skills, either swordplay skills. I think in this game, he's got 4 different styles of lightsaber usage. You can also use it on what they call his force powers, which is like improving his recovery rate from using his force skills, how much force skill he's able to use. There's a handful of other like stuff around when you do a pull or a push, like how effective that is against groups of enemies, or how much range it can have, or how long it can hold. If you do the mind trick to enemies, how long it keeps them confused, all that stuff. And then there are ones for his just standard health stuff, like how much HP he has, how much he recovers from stims, which is essentially the healing item in this game, and this is pure souls. You have a fixed number of these healing items that BD1 is carrying around, and you press up on the D-pad, and he uses it on you, and you regain some health. You can upgrade how much health you gain every time it's used by leveling up that stat. You can also upgrade how fast BD1 administers it, because there is a delay. If you don't get it off before you get that last hit on you, you fucking die, and it's very frustrating. And then throughout the world, these are some of the most hidden items in the game. You can find upgrades so he has more and more stims available to him. I think I got to 11 by the time I finished the game. You start at 2. And these are usually you get these for fighting an optional boss. Usually it's an optional boss that's A, really strong, and B, in a hidden area. And if you die, you respawn at whatever the last one of these campfires, meditation sites you used. And also at the meditation sites, you can restore all your health and refill your stim containers. But in so doing, all the enemies respawn. Excepting for, like, story enemies who are just dead. Which, again, it's very Souls. That's a very Souls thing. So that's kind of where it gets its Souls inspiration from. If you die, you lose all your experience towards the next level. If you've already leveled up, you don't lose that. But you can go pick it up by either killing the enemy, or if it's a boss, it'll just be sitting there in the field, and you just touch it, and you're good to go. In terms of combat, it actually is probably one of the most effective representations of lightsaber combat I've seen. Cal can parry. There's a parry timer. Again, a little bit Souls-like. but it makes a lot of sense in this context, and you can stagger through parrying. You can also stagger through use of force powers, or you can stagger by attacking someone who's just hard blocking. You also can hard block. The combat actually feels really good. The base lightsaber feels particularly good, and you don't upgrade how much damage you do, although you do get other stances, some of which do more damage than others. But I definitely am significantly more effective in combat now than I was then, even though the damage I'm doing isn't upgraded. I'm just better at swordplay because it does feel right and it does make sense. And there's a logic behind how you should block, how you should time your blocks, what happens when you block somebody, how you should get your attacks in, what kind of attacks you should use, how you should dodge, all that stuff. That you sort of intuitively start to learn as you play through the game. And so when you have fights against other Jedi or other Force users who are using lightsabers, those are sort of like your tests, like how much have you been learning? Because against the Trade Federation droid, whatever, you block the shot and it goes flying back at him, and you hear him go, "Oh no," as he blows up, because they do that. I did want to say one piece of banter I love. The writing in this game is actually really good in general. It feels like a Star Wars TV show more than a Star Wars movie in how it's written, and that's okay. Both games are the quest for the doodad that has the thing. And they always have a very Star Wars kind of like, be careful what you wish for outcome of getting the thing. But one piece of interaction I had was a battle droid and a raider. The raiders are humanoid. The battle droid saying to him, as the commander, if we see the Jedi, I order you to go first. I'll command from the back. And the raider responds, "I'm not dying for no droid." And then they have this long, awkward pause. And you just hear the very sort of like sad battle droid go, "But I'm the commander." And then, like, if you let them talk for a while, there's another stretch of silence. And then the raider goes, "I've got an idea. You're the commander here, so why don't you lead from the front if we see the Jedi?" And he goes, "That's a great idea. I'm going to be a great commander." And then I fucking annihilated both of them. And Cal had some comment on the fact that is like, well, he led from the front or some bullshit like that. I fucking adore that. I adore the absolute stupidity of them talking. Even the stormtroopers, who aren't nearly as stupid as the battle droids, will often have like goofy conversations with each other because they're just standing on a ledge overlooking a rift that's full of like banthas. They don't want to go down there. It's full of things that want to eat them. And it's just 3 stormtroopers. They're going to get fucking annihilated if the Jedi comes around. They're very aware of this. And so they're just talking about like, so the Jedi here, do you think he fought in the Clone Wars? Oh, I hope not. He's going to be a real tough bastard if he did. There can't possibly be a Jedi here, guys. Right? Right? And then you just drop in on him and start killing. It feels right. Like, that's the thing. That, like, I'm not going to get into like episodes 7 through 9 conversation because that's not healthy. They just never felt right. I don't know what it was about them. They didn't feel right. This feels right. Like, it feels like it has the right sense of humor for Star Wars content. Like, Star Wars content was always a little bit silly. I mean, for fuck's sake, Attack of the Clones? Yeah, Attack of the Clones, there's a scene in a 1950s diner. Like, it's not meant to be super serious. And this feels like it hit that tone right. Cal's got a lot of shit going on. And he's not handling it well. And the rest of his friends are like, "You're not really handling this very well." But he's going to do it anyway because he's got this weird sense of obligation that comes from him being a survivor's guilt. But at the same time, he's fighting these like 30-year-old relic battle droids that are just so fucking stupid and so hapless and just have absolutely no chance. And he's just like, okay, I guess I got to deal with these idiots now. And he just sort of lets it loose. He's just having a good time. Whatever. Yeah, I there's a lot of influence in this game. There's a lot of stuff that Nintendo fans, especially Metroid fans, 3D Metroid fans might really like. Again, this is on both games are on Game Pass now. They're on EA Play. So EA Play and not Game Pass, they're on there. They're both worth playing. Play them in order if you're going to play them. because I don't know that one's strictly better than the other. I think whichever one you play first will have a bigger impact. But they're both good. Like, I think the first one might be a little bit better. Because the second one is bigger, and in some cases that causes trouble for it. But you get to do, if you're a Star Wars fan, you get to do a lot of Star Wars sightseeing. You get to go, like, fucking ape shit on Coruscant as a Jedi running from people in the Imperial era. That's really fun, because there's a lot of stormtroopers saying dumb shit about where's the Jedi at. At some point, you get to fight really predictable Sith characters. And that's pretty cool, too. Even if it's kind of the hardest fight in the game, and it's not even the end of the game. You just get to do it because it's what the game wants to do, and it's big and dramatic and fun and hard. It's really hard. And this game has one feature that I really like, which is you can adjust the difficulty at any time. And difficulties are just setting sliders. So, like, if you find that you suck at parrying, you can leave the difficulty where it is, but make the parrying way more forgiving by just adjusting the parry slider. The difficulty settings are just default values for those sliders. It's like parry, how much damage enemies do, how much damage you do, recovery time, and there's another one. And basically, it's like, I can make this game as easy or as hard as I want. I kept it sort of in the middle difficulty. But, like, if you find that it's too hard for one fight, like I had one fight that I just couldn't fucking solve, I just kicked the parry time up a little bit so I could parry it better. And that was it. I got through it, I moved it back down, and we were good to go. So there's actually a lot here to recommend it, and it's playing with a lot of different tropes from different series, game series, not movie series. And it does a nice job creating a character that they obviously hired a real actor in facial scan, so if he was popular, they could put him in TV content, and I think they have by now, so there you go. But yeah, these are good, and you should, like I said, if you're a Metroid Prime fan who's already gotten through Metroid Prime Remaster and is just waiting for whatever the next drip feed is, I'd go ahead and give one of these a shot. The first one, preferably, if you haven't played it. And I think they're different, obviously, than Metroid, because Metroid's in first person. But there's a lot to recommend here in that respect. So yeah, I mean, it's worth doing, I think, personally. I mean, obviously, if you're not a fan of the franchise, it's not going to be any good. But I think they still mechanically play well enough that you could have a good time with it. But there is a shitload of fan service. There's so much fucking fan service. Holy shit. Basically, there's a million things in this game that BD1 can scan, just like the scan visor in Metroid. And they just give you background info. There's so many of these. There's so many. I think I'm at like 40% scan. It's fucking terrible. And yeah, it's all fan service. It's all fucking fan service. And yeah, in very George Lucas fashion, the key set of this is your starship, where you warp between planets, and a cantina, where you just get to see a rogues gallery of what would have been in the 80s Jim Henson Muppets. It's fun. And that's, to me, that was it. Like, I talked about this with, Star Wars Starfighter, where it's like, oh, you get to see the inside of a Star Destroyer in 3D because I was using the VR helmet. And that had its own, like, oh, this is really neat for the franchise. This has that, but it's a constant. It's not just because I'm inside a Star Destroyer in 3D. It's just they built a Star Wars world and actually populated it correctly and put a good game on top of it. Because again, Respawn makes good games. Also, if you haven't played Titanfall 2, you should play that because it's amazing and it's short. It's real short. I think this game was about 20 to 30 hours for me. I think the first one was about 15. So, but yeah, Titanfall 2 also amazing. Also worth playing. Very good. Just a single player. I touched the multiplayer. I never touched it. It's great. There you go. That's it. I'm going to move on now. Greg.
So, my sort of copy of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door arrived today. So, I've had put a very little bit of time into that. Just, the intro and the prologue and all that kind of thing. So, very much as one would expect from the pre-release materials, which, kind of focused on this bit, a fair bit, like with some of the YouTube videos and put out just the graphics, look, really nice, the kind of where they kind of arrived at with the more recent games like Origami King kind of applied to Thousand Year Door, giving it that more kind of physical appearance with the upgraded lighting and texturing, so it really does feel more like everything's made out of paper rather than it's kind of flat things that are vaguely kind of paper themed, I guess. I should say, I never owned Thousand Year Door. I played it a bit, but I did not play all the way through it, and I didn't own it. So yeah, this will be my first time playing through the game. I maybe thinking I'd try and get to Color Splash because I have that on Wii U. But before this, but I didn't get around to it. So yeah, it's don't use the Wii U very much, funnily enough. And so I guess that'll wait until sometime between now and presumably 2028 when the next Paper Mario game emerges, because it does tend to be a lot of the time every 4 years or so. So moving on to a few other things, I've kept going a bit on Animal Well. I've found many, many more treasure chests and, kind of extra things, and filled in a bunch of gaps in the map, but haven't done anything like terribly kind of consequential seemingly, but it's still been very fun to just solve those individual puzzles, and you're still finding out things that like certain items can do that I didn't know they could, and things like that. So I can imagine that could keep yielding kind of discoveries and things for quite a while yet to come. And also I did actually play through Super Mario Land again. Because I can't remember whether I did this on Virtual Console or not. I probably did. Was doing the second sort of loop, because it is slightly different. They put a few more extra enemies in.
I never knew this.
Yeah, what it is once you've beaten it once, you go back to the title screen, it'll have the best score, that you've put in. Mm-hmm. Originally it would have been during that play session or whatever, because it wouldn't have had a battery. But the actual icon next to the kind of start prompt has changed from, I think it's originally a mushroom, to like Mario's face. And this indicates that, the kind of second loop is kind of ready. It's similar to Super Mario Brothers, as you might expect, when that added like a bunch of like Buzzy Beetles, didn't it? Or whatever they are. Like, there's like trios of them when you play the second loop of Super Mario Brothers, like quite common. Here, like, certainly in the first world, you'll notice like the presence of those fly enemies, in places they weren't before and all that. I imagine there was a pretty hard constraint on how many enemies they could have at once in this game, because, I was talking about, playing Castlevania Legends on NSO, when that was randomly, not truly randomly, obviously, but it seemed a bit odd the way that just emerged out of nowhere in Halloween last year, which was like 8 years later than Super Mario Land, and that cannot handle having very many enemies on screen at once at all. So it kind of, at times, the action is relatively more sort of busy than I would have imagined from a launch day game, but still, you get the idea. It's not very different. It's just got a few extra enemies, but it's kind of welcome because, as you mentioned, it's very easy. So anything that just kind of spices it up a bit, and it doesn't actually like slow it down particularly badly. I don't know whether maybe if you take your time and let more enemies build up or something, it could get work. But if you're going through at a decent clip, it'll kind of go well enough. And so I think what I had done is, having done one, having finished it once, I just made a save state, so that any subsequent time I would go through it, on the second loop, on the more busy sort of version, and which makes sense again, just because it's so easy the first time. So I think it's worth doing because it's so quick. It's another one of those things that's so quick, like you can actually kind of play it for score a little bit as well, because normally, like, I wouldn't. Like played Super Mario Brothers, like I can't remember ever even thinking about what score I was getting in that. I was just worried about staying alive. That was it, because lives are really quite hard to come by in the original Super Mario Brothers. Well, if you're not doing the trick, with the Koopa shell on the stairs, that's another thing. But so that was another Super Mario Land playthrough. I might go back to it at some point, but for now, I'll get on to Kirby's Return to Dreamland on Switch. So yeah, this I did play it on Wii back in 2012, probably something like that. And as I've mentioned before, I did play a lot of it in multiplayer back then. Actually, just two. Like obviously had 4-player, but still. So it's a little bit different here because I think like playing that in as a 2-player kind of experience. Actually, it was over kind of quite a few separate occasions. It was not played through in a concentrated fashion. Whereas I went through this pretty fast, and I've played very, very many more Kirby games since I played that. So ripped through the single player very quickly here, and had almost all the kind of there's these sort of parts to this sort of starship that you're kind of fixing. That's kind of the fundamental kind of quest in the story mode that are somewhat analogous to Star Coins, back in New Super Mario Brothers games, and all these Kirby platformers that this kind of spawned have some kind of analogous thing. I think in Robobot it's like these code cube things and whatnot, but there's always something. And once I went through the story mode, I think I had like 3 that I hadn't got. I mean, it's first of all, they're not like trying to hide them that kind of carefully, or in really kind of obscure corners that would be tough to find. Like it's notable compared to something like New Super Mario Brothers U. They're much more out in the open. There might be a time where it's like, okay, you need a certain power, or there's a certain like sequence where things are happening quickly and you need to be in the right kind of lane in the environment to get it or something. But for the most part, it's pretty much out there for you to get them. It's not too sort of complicated, and not in an isolated sense. This kind of reminded me of something. I've not talked about it because I did it sort of very piecemeal over a kind of spread out over time, but played through the original New Super Mario Brothers on my DSi. I did that not so long ago. And that is much more similar, actually. Like, if they hadn't, in the original New Super Mario Brothers, they had not got to the point yet where they were hiding it, like, in, like, bunch of, like, trick walls and all that kind of stuff, more in the Yoshi's Island kind of way of hiding things. In the original New Super Mario Brothers, it was much more like this, like Kirby, where they're there. You can see them, but maybe you need to be tiny Mario to like go in a pipe, and then you'll be able to access that star coin, or you'll just need to do a nifty bit of platforming, some wall jumping or something, bounce off an enemy, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was it brought that back to mind, actually, relative to kind of how the New Super Mario Brothers progressed, the series progressed. And also, I suppose you have to say, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which didn't exactly have star coins, it had those like 30 purple coins or whatever they were, so it didn't quite work the same, but they were similar, but they tended to be more like overt, didn't they? Like they're just there, you can see them, you just need to get them, however, but rather than the more kind of opaque kind of placement of the way they did things in the latter New Super Mario Brothers game. So it was a very sort of quick experience, play through the story mode, and and pleasant, as I expected. Another way which it reminded me a little bit of that first New Super Mario Brothers game, in playing it after the others have come out, is it does feel like it's kind of, a lot of the stuff is there, but it's not, when you've played the others, it kind of feels like it's missing that kind of those few elements on top to really kind of push it over the edge. Obviously, with Kirby, the main one I would go to is Robobot, and the mech. that really adds quite a lot to it. I think that just makes it more interesting. You have these kind of ultra powers, essentially, where like it's okay, well now you've got like the really massive sword rather than just a regular sword for a bit. That I think is Kirby's new final smash to replace when he would put everyone
Kirby
in.
Mega evolves into a giant swordsman.
As opposed to his original Final Smash was putting everyone in the cooking pot, but I guess that was deemed to like take too long.
Those animation ones got nerfed.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that played out over a longer period of time was just like they wanted to compress it into so it was more comparable for everyone. But yeah, so you got that sword one. You've got one for fire and so forth. So it's kind of like it serves the purpose, but they did it sort of in more interesting ways in the later games. So like it does feel like as it is going backwards a little bit, but it's all especially with the the graphical makeover is not like terribly drastic, but it looks really sort of clean with this like art style where they've got a bit like Smash for 3DS actually, with the more sort of stark outlines and things. To I think try to keep things more readable. I did mention this having played Star Allies, which of course I did in single player, but it's kind of like mandatory multi-character in that case. Like you'll have AI characters with you, and given that the on-screen action could get a little bit difficult to read at times. So like I can see why, because this, you don't have to have it as a multiplayer experience, but you certainly can, why maybe they said, okay, let's make the graphics sort of more, easy to read. And especially with them being, simple to begin with, because it was a Wii game, just kind of fits well enough with that, sort of having that sort of superimposed on top of it. And so, yeah, I would have thought in that sense anyway, it might be, a little bit more doable as a kind of multiplayer game if you were playing it that way. And I should imagine it's pretty good fun, even if it's not as designed around that it was designed around that back on Wii, but it was more of a kind of you can play it in multiplayer rather than you must, although having done it in 2-player or 12 years ago or whatever, it was I thought it worked pretty well. But the real thing I was interested to see was, again, something that was missing at this point from the original game, a kind of that extra mode that subsequent games always had. So in the case of like Triple Deluxe, you had the DDD speed trial kind of mode. In Robobot, you had the Meta Knight sort of speed run mode, which again is sort of riffing off something that they did for I think the Kirby's Adventure remake on GBA and the Superstar remake on DS. They both had kind of extra mode starring Meta Knight. So there's a tradition of it that precedes, this game in its original form. But this didn't really have anything like that. It had an extra mode, much like Kirby's Adventure, a sort of more difficult kind of loop, almost, just try with like, more stringent on health and things. But it didn't have that speed run kind of element. And I like that in Kirby games, because it's one of these things like Kirby is always, it's got such a great sort of powerful moveset, being able to float before you even bring in any of the powers or any of that kind of stuff. Like it's I don't know whether to say trivial, but it's no great thing to just navigate a platforming space as Kirby. But if to do it quickly is where the challenge can come in. And they do capitalize on that in the base game with certain elements of the design. Like there are these kinds of 4 scrolling sections, essentially. So it's like, okay, well, yeah, if you just kind of very gradually float through this stuff, it's going to be too slow, so you actually need to get to grips with, how Kirby's sort of locomotion works, so that and how to do everything, at a reasonable pace. Again, it's pretty gentle, they're not asking any great speed running feats from you in those circumstances, but, I think, They're capitalizing on that element of Kirby. And so I was wondering, what the new extra mode that they've got here themed around Magalore would kind of tap into that, maybe the same way that those DDD and Meta Knight modes did in the 3DS games. And it doesn't exactly. It kind of does, and it kind of doesn't, I should say. It's an interesting thing that they've gone for. It's not just like, okay, a lot of the time, like the DDD one for Triple Deluxe is like, okay, we're going to almost do an abridged version of the single player kind of campaign, right? And we're all these kind of bits of levels like stitched together in a condensed version, and you've got to get through it as quickly as possible. And they had like leaderboards like that you could swap around with Street Pass, I think, and whatnot. But that was kind of the challenge, was getting through it as fast as possible, kind of giving you a way to replay much of the game in that kind of condensed fashion, and testing you in a different way. What this Magalore mode does is there's a little bit of overlap in the sense that it's all about combos, right? So it's like, okay, every time that you kind of attack an enemy, you are a combo meter starts building up, and you've got like a certain amount of time to strike or perhaps defeat another enemy to keep that combo meter going before it kind of times out, and then you'd have to start a new one. So there is an incentive in this to rush through, because you want to keep that combo going, and in order to do it, you've got to physically get from one enemy to the next in as quick a amount of time as possible, and then by getting bigger combos, you earn a higher score, and then that higher score goes into sort of buying back essentially Magalore's sort of powers that he's lost. So it's kind of interesting in that it's like it has this element of the speedrun, but also you're kind of starting off without anything, like a very sort of incapable character. He sort of doesn't really have that, what I talked about, the sort of extremely versatile, pretty much unchallengeable kind of Kirby abilities. But once you invest in all these powers, like, well, you're extremely powerful. You've got all sorts of different attacks and ability to float and extra jumps and air dashes and all this kind of stuff. And I guess you're choosing which ones you think will be more useful, in terms of what you spend on first. But it's the most interesting part, I guess, in a sense, comes with the bosses, because in this case, bosses, you're not really rewarded so much for killing them quickly the way you are in the speedrun scenario. In this case, it's all about having that unbroken chain of, unbroken's ideal, but you certainly don't need to do that. But having as many kind of big chains of attacks as possible without getting hurt, which actually, rewards more a careful style of play, which is precisely opposite from how I normally play Kirby bosses, whether it's normal, like, circumstance or especially in a time run circumstance. I'm like, just get in there and kick the shit out of it. Don't wait. Don't, hope that it's not going to attack you. Just like get in there and use whatever power you've got that's hopefully a good match and kill it as fast as possible. That's always been my sort of instinct. And that was the thing with this Magalore mode. It's, kind of tracking, how well you do, that score you get based on your combos and all the gems that you kind of collect. And with the regular levels, I was scoring like kind of, it was giving me kind of gold or even the platinum, shiny, whatever, like sort of grades pretty easily. But then I get to the boss and it'd be like, oh, the bronze. And it was like, no, I'm just doing this wrong. So yeah, because when you get hurt, it breaks the combo. So yeah, it was a completely different sort of experience of like, even when you got really quite powerful to the point that, you could take this thing down pretty fast if that was the main objective. It's like, no, you should be careful, you be disciplined, and just, make sure you get all your hits in, just try sometimes, going out of your way to just get that one little attack in while it's like doing something like, kind kind of flitting across the screen in some way just to keep that combo going. It's interesting. It's like, I think it's like, it's pretty minor ultimately. It's not a huge deal. I don't know whether it's anything that would really sell someone on the game outright at all, if you didn't have any interest in replaying through the base game, or all this, like, there's this Magoland, like all the mini game multiplayer stuff, which I'm sure is probably quite fun. I remember playing some of those mini games back in the original version all those years ago. There were some that were like simple fun, but I'm not going to play any of them now. So yeah, it's not terribly long. It's not that sort of desperately different from some of these other kind of analogous modes in previous Kirby games, but it was different enough that it wasn't just like, oh, it's literally just taking this kind of extra mode thing that they've done for all the games that came after Kirby's Return to Dreamland and putting it into that. It's actually a slightly, different concept that did help make it feel a little bit more fresh and just kind of made you think, they could probably do more with something like this. If I had to sort of connect it to anything I can remember playing in the past, obviously it's different, but you think of like Jungle Beat. It's very combo based, where like you kind of have to keep, you have to keep doing things sort of, to keep that score going kind of thing.
Hammer the drum.
Yeah, obviously with that, it's much more like the level is literally laid out to,
Right.
you were doing things on rhythm to a fair degree. It's not exactly a rhythm game, but it is a platformer, but everything is kind of laid out in such a way that that's really kind of what they're expecting you to do, and you should be doing the correct things at the correct time to keep that combo going and get it as high as possible and stuff. So I don't know whether it's quite as like prescribed as that in this case with Magalore, but there's it's similar in terms of this feeling of like, oh, can I just get somewhere in time and get to keep it going and keep that kind of big number up, and then that's first of all, if you get all like the gold medals, it unlocks like a secret final stage to kind of tell you you've beaten that mode for real, and also just it gives you a bigger score to reinvest in Magalore's abilities, which means you're going to kind of progress quicker. So it's a decent kind of incentive structure in that way. And you also have like a few little stages that are analogous to the kind of ability rooms that are in the base campaign and that were in the Kirby Anniversary Collection based on copy abilities and things. Like they're very short and not difficult at all, but they kind of can give you a little bit of a leg up at getting some of to get a bunch of those gems, because you get bonuses for completing anything the first time. So kind of gives you a bit of a pointer for which abilities to buy for, which ones they want you to buy first. Like they give you the ability to buy pretty much anything you want almost. It's pretty open, but those extra sort of challenge rooms, I would kind of say, you might want to buy this one, and it'll give you kind of a bit of a leg up. So yeah, it's a nice little morsel of kind of Kirby related content into something that overall is a pretty sound package if you haven't played it before. The only somewhat downside is, like I said, it does feel a little bit less grand, a little bit less kind of fully formed if you've played more recent Kirby games. I mean, certainly I can remember getting to the end and thinking, wow, that went places, that got quite sort of grandiose. It's very much referencing Kirby's Adventure, because that's pretty much what this was. It was kind of like just like, again, a bit like New Super Mario Brothers, but for Kirby and Kirby's Adventure. It was literally called Kirby's Adventure Wii here, I think, as a more direct reference to what it was called in Japan, because that was the era of NOE doing that with damn near everything.
With the universal gravitation.
Yes, that's. I mean, well, that's pretty much the example of that, isn't it? But
it's the worst.
Yeah, but I will say, you know, when you think about some of the shit that's been in Kirby finale since, this is quaint. You know, like, this is just like, yeah, all right, you know, it's kind of a big thing that happens at the end, but like, yeah, some of Kirby games lately, just the cosmic shit that goes down at the end again. This does feel a bit minor by comparison, but it's still all really quite well put together.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that'll do for now. Like I said, hopefully I'll be able to make some good progress in the 1,000-Year Duel before next week.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we've got a little bit of news to cover, but mostly because it was relevant to a previous email, and then we're going to do some of your listener mail, maybe more than one this week, although we are on a streak that indicates that is not the case. So stay tuned to see if we pull that off. We are back with some news before we get to listener mail. So, a couple stories broke this week. One, I totally understand why I got pinged on it and why RFN got pinged on it, because 2 weeks ago when Seren was on, she made a passing comment, referencing a passing comment in Nintendo's investor briefing, where the current CEO made an admission towards the reality that developing games is getting more complicated and taking more times, and that it's necessary to grow, and that one of those mechanisms for growth might be M&A, mergers and acquisitions. If somebody asked what M&A stood for during the episode, so I'll repeat it. It stands for mergers and acquisitions. Specifically, an A in this case. Nintendo's not going to merge with anybody. This would be an acquisition. And Seren notes, I hope Nintendo for once has been paying attention to the industry trends and is not going to do this. And one of the companies that was mentioned into the generic industry trends was the Embracer Group, which, as we refer to them, the Embracing. I want to point out that we were way ahead of the game on the Embracer Group, because every time they would announce they bought something else, we would pretty much consistently go, how were they financing this? I do want to make a slight correction, though. What came up during the conversation where it was like, Embracer just had access to cheap money. Actually, it's worse than that.
You mentioned this before, haven't you, basically? They're almost getting paid.
No, they are explicitly getting paid.
by the was it which Scandinavian central bank was it that?
Yeah. I believe they were Swedish.
Yeah.
Yes. And the Swedish central bank literally had negative base interest rates because they wanted companies in Sweden, the Swedish banks, not the central bank, the commercial banks of Sweden, they wanted to effectively compel them to issue business loans to continue to keep the economy going. So they were literally paying these banks to take out loans from the central bank under the assumption that they would then turn around and issue loans that weren't negative but were comically low to customers, because effectively there's no risk of default on them because the loan is making the money just by existing, or very limited risk of default. Technically speaking, you'd still be out the money and you have to find a way to pay it back, but risk is greatly mitigated when there's no interest involved. And that did finally crack. Not that much. It's not like their interest rate has gone up dramatically, but yeah, it's not negative anymore. And yeah, like once people start asking for the money to come due when you're that heavily debt leveraged, you have problems. And they did. So funny we go through all that. Embracer gets explicitly name dropped in that conversation with thought, I hope Nintendo's been paying attention and isn't going to go this route. Well, this week it was announced that Nintendo's acquiring porting studio Shiver Entertainment from Embracer Group, which is truly a wild ride. So Shiver was part of Saber Interactive when Embracer acquired Saber, and then I guess they've since sold Saber, It wasn't part of the whole, like, whatever and friends bullshit they were pulling off, or one of the companies they're just going to drop a bunch of debt on, and the other two are the ones they're going to try to sell, and one's the core business. I think the one that's the core business is like Middle Earth and Friends or some shit. It's a completely insane name like that. Drachmech and Friends is the one that's full of debt, and then there's a third one that's like stuff they're trying to spin off. But they, Shiver is about 100 developers who largely have been working on ports to, their job is essentially port software to other systems from the base platform. They're based in Miami. So this is an American division. And they've worked on projects like Scribblenauts Mega Pack on Switch, Mortal Kombat 11 on Switch, which was pretty well regarded, and Mortal Kombat 1 on Switch, which was happened. And
it's all stuff connected with Warner's, right?
Yeah, this is basically all Warner stuff.
Hogwarts, Mortal Kombat, it's all Warner stuff.
Yeah, they were basically contracted by Warner to do Switch ports. I think they may have also done a couple other projects, but they were only 100 people, so there's a limited scope of what they're going to be able to do. And Nintendo announced as part of the acquisition that they would, Shiver's focus will remain the same, continuing to commissions that port and develop software for multiple platforms, including Nintendo Switch. People immediately read into that. Just don't read into that, because one, Nintendo has another system coming out in the next year or so. So that's multiple systems right out of the gate, but also they probably have existing contractual obligations for projects that they have in flight. And so that would also constitute multiple systems. Nintendo did not buy this company to have them make ports for non-Nintendo systems. They exist to fill that specific role. The questioning of why? This is probably pretty close to the situation that we had with the Next Level. They were a studio that was involved in creating ports for Switch. They were seemingly pretty good at it, Mortal Kombat 1 aside. That game just probably wasn't really compatible for Switch ever, and so the fact it even happened was something, but it probably also had a bunch of limitations on it from Warner. And Nintendo was the financial situation around Embracer. And
that's the biggest thing here, isn't it? I mean, because as you've already mentioned, with Embracer seemingly being pretty hurting for being able to, for liquidity, basically, to turn anything of the stuff that they've amassed into cash that they can use to fulfill the obligations that they've left for themselves with their debt-fueled buyouts. You could imagine that this was a very reasonable price that they paid.
Oh yeah, pennies on the dollar.
The leverage that the Embracer has at this stage in this sort of is minimal, because everybody knows they're just hard up for liquidity and will be grateful for any way they can get it that isn't completely out of whack with the asset in question. So there's that part of it straight away. It seems like you're probably going to be getting some useful development assets for a very competitive price, to say the least. And obviously it's not that similar to the Next Level situation, because that was a very close, what had become over time a very close collaboration that they just wanted to keep going. This is something that clearly they have, expertise, experience from working on Nintendo platform sort of projects for quite some time now, but not in the same kind of close up sort of proximity with Nintendo itself, and so it's not a question of, wanting to keep something going. It clearly is something that is okay. This is something that we can, for a reasonable cost, and presumably based on their original experience, without too great a process of having to teach them things, level their skills up or anything like that. Get them to a purpose that they have, presumably related to the flow of software for the next platform, primarily.
Yeah, and there is another advantage here, which is by having them in the U.S. So right now, NST does a lot of the developer relations work for Nintendo in North America. Obviously, Retro is not fielding calls from third parties, nor is Next Level. Well, Next Level might have in a past life, but more as a friend deal, less as a hey, can I reach out to you as an official Nintendo rep? This is a porting studio. I fully expect that beyond porting titles, there's going to be members of this team that are devoted towards developer relations, figuring out how to taking advice or making advice available to teams who are porting their own games to Switch. And now as being inside the house with the other Nintendo North American companies, they can take technology that companies like, or divisions like Retro or Next Level produce, or NST, and make them commercially available. Like, they can focus on saying, hey, Retro's made this thing that makes the Switch successor run better. This technology for, this adaptation towards the standard library that's out there, or this engine modification that makes it run better, whatever. Like, these technological components, they can, as a studio based in North America, work directly with those companies, bundle that thing up and make it available. Or they can, hey, we're getting a lot of questions about how to boost efficiency. What have y'all learned? Like, there's the ability to do more intelligence sharing now in that North American division. Like, when Next Level came in, prior to that, it was just Retro and NST, Seattle and, Redmond, and down in Austin. Now you've got, I can't remember what city Next Level's actually based in, but they're up in Canada.
I think it's Vancouver.
Yeah, well, it's a whole Salmonon thing, right? That's why Bear Hugger shouts Salmonon
that's right.
in Punch Out for Wii.
That's right. So, like, they actually weren't that far from NST, but now you have a studio that does ports. That's their thing. That's their expertise. So they can definitely take learnings from the other North American branches and make that information available and play a support role. Take some of that weight off NST, who does that plus whatever current Mario Minis project needs to be done. Share some of that load out. And yeah, they continue to exist to make sure, hey, there's a really desirable product Nintendo wants to have on their system day and date, and the publisher isn't necessarily in a position they can make it work on the Switch successor. Well, don't worry, we have the studio for you. And they could put them on that. Like, there's opportunity that having this studio creates for producing titles and ensuring you have them on your system, but also broadly to act as a support infrastructure and to be middleware developers and to make stuff available to general publishers that you might have internally, but don't have a mechanism to externalize. And as a consequence, have better ports on your system than you presently will, or than you will otherwise. Like, there's a lot of things they can do, and there's a synergistic advantage of it being there with the other North American teams who, besides NST, really haven't had someone to fill that role. And NST, I'm sure, is extremely busy because they ain't that big. It also puts them in another geographic footprint in North America that they could expand. They can hire people into this studio and cross-train them with people who already have experience. They can send people to Retro to learn things. Hey, go spend a couple sprints down there learning how they do some stuff, or learning some technology that they've developed, or learning how to develop for the next Nintendo system, which is a thing that studios are going to have to start doing. So there's just advantages of having a studio in that position. And yeah, there's a fact sheet Nintendo put out about the acquisition where it says price 10, like $10, which doesn't make any sense. I cannot figure out what the fuck it means. Like, I thought maybe it was per share, but that doesn't make any sense because that's less than the price, or that's significantly more than the price of an Embracer share, which is like $2 a share right now. I can't figure out what that 10 is. I think they just put it there to make me crazy. There's no way they just paid $10 for the studio. That would be insane. Obviously, the costs are really, now they've got 100 new employees, they've got building rent, all that stuff. But
even though I think we can be sure that in many ways they got this, at an abnormally low kind of level, it's still, you're assuming a lot of obligations. It's not something you do lightly, and especially Nintendo. I think even though Seren, as you said, she flagged it up, like, this answer is more acknowledging of the possibility than it normally is, when they.
And it was definitely in the works. Like, this doesn't happen
exactly.
Instantly.
So she was right that was reflective of something that was, either on the table or in fact, as it must have been, in progress in this case. Yeah. But the point is, isn't different, isn't reflective of any change in their character in terms of how, it's very kind of conservative and they are, but equally, the development environment is changing, especially when you're making a jump to a new platform after, a long time now, that they've been, especially because Wii U and Switch, while different in terms of their architecture and all that kind of stuff, not so different in terms of the kinds of games that you were making. Because obviously a great many Switch games were Wii U games for a start, This is a very major kind of moment, this transition to the next platform for Nintendo, because obviously they've been making, either Wii U or Switch games for more than a decade. So, this is, clearly something, they have to reckon with, and a lot of that is going to be internal stuff. But this figures to be a part of it as well. And again, they're not going to just do it willy-nilly, but it's so the opposite of what Embracer was doing, isn't it? It's
just buy everything.
It's just like, it's a sort of targeted acquisition when it can be had for relatively low cost, for a specific purpose, when you certainly do not need to debt finance it. As we said a couple of weeks ago, Nintendo's been sitting on so much liquidity for so long. It's never been for a lack of funds to do anything. They wouldn't need the credit markets to fund anything unless it was stupidly big. So it is very much the kind of fitting in a way that they're peeling off something from Embracer's sort of, I don't know what you want to say,
profligacy?
Yeah, profligacy certainly, yes, but just like marauding, I don't know. It was, what exactly they were trying to do in terms of speculation that they were, just trying to bundle all these things together so they'd be more attractive for some larger entity to buy the whole thing. Again, that's something that Nintendo would never look to do. They're not looking to sell to somebody bigger. They're not looking to get bought. So it's just they're very much the antithesis.
The funny thing is, like, normally when companies look to get acquired, they spin assets off because they're trying to make the price to acquire them lower. But Embracer seems to have followed this philosophy of, like, the bigger we get, the more IP we hold, the more brands we have, the more valuable we are to an acquirer, which is like, no,
it's some sort of strange perception of economy in that, like, well, you get all this stuff in one deal, so it must be a good deal. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, GameStop packaging the Wii with like all the plastic toys and all the like the 2 games and 3 controllers, but not the good ones.
Yeah, or like you're like your financial instruments with bad mortgages in them. Like, when is this ever a good thing? Bundling this,
but you get so many bad mortgages. Like, you get hundreds of them. I mean, it goes back to the example I gave last week of at some point Disney ended up acquiring a holding company that did have the Spruce Goose as one of its assets. They didn't want the fucking Spruce Goose. No one wants the Spruce Goose. That's why it's in a museum. It is a synonym for, like, poorly conceived ideas that are very expensive.
The boondoggle, isn't it? Yeah, that it is like it's a. I mean, boondoggle's a pretty fun word, but Spruce Goose, come on.
Yeah, but, like, they did end up owning it. They didn't want it, But like this was a situation where like, well, there's an asset we desperately want, and this other shit's thrown in. I guess we have to deal with it. This was a company looking to add spruce gooses to them because this will make our balance sheet more exciting. It's like, no, I mean, yes, it probably does make your balance sheet more exciting. Can you imagine if you were trying to buy Embracer?
Exciting, like reading some sort of thriller novel, where it's like, oh wow, it's really going sideways now. I wonder what will happen next.
It's like, imagine if you actually wanted to buy Embracer and you're just like, okay, what would we end up owning if we bought this? And somebody drops the fucking phone book on your desk. It's like, okay, no, actually, I've changed my mind. I don't even want to do the research for this. This sucks already. It's
no, so I don't know. It's always been difficult to kind of say to go along with that theory that they were looking to get quite to spin this cheap what was cheap debt fueled acquisitions into a takeover. But then on the other hand, it's difficult to accept them on the basis of that you thought it was actually going to generate the money back, that it was genuinely a good investment either. So
right.
It's just difficult to discern at all, really.
Maybe it's just very Swedish in a way that we'll never understand. I mean, like that, the only thing I could think of is that like maybe there was like some weird business philosophy that's not taught in business schools in English language, but getting bigger. That's stronger. Like, they're just like, if we agglutination ourselves into being such a large company that no one can stop us. It's like, well, sir, I don't think this is a strong plan. So yeah, Nintendo ends up with this studio. I mean, that 10 fascinates me. I want to know what that 10 means. I desperately need to, like, did they really just pay $10? Is it just like some nominal fee to cover the fact that Nintendo did pay? Like, sometimes you have that in contracts.
No, maybe it's like if you were rating the price out of 10 for how good a price it was, you'd give it a 10.
Great price. Like, is it just like Embracer's like, we need to get rid of these 100 employees, and Nintendo's like, we'll give you $1, and like, well, for contractual reasons, it needs to be at least 10. Done. $10.
It truly is nominal, isn't it? It's just
for legal reasons, it must be at least $10 for it to count as a sale, so we could say we sold something. Done. Here's $10. We'll give it to you in cash. We'll deliver it to you. Here's a $10 bill. Brand new. Brand fucking new. Give us the keys. Also, if you're an employee of this company, how much better do you feel today?
It's on the one hand, look, anytime, I can only assume that anytime there's a change of ownership, there's got to be a fair amount of trepidation involved because, presumably,
it's stressful.
A lot of the time it's going to be for a different purpose, right? Now, I mean, the exception to that would be like Next Level Games, I guess, because that was very much like, okay, the ownership's changing to keep you on
Literal
the same
old boss,
purpose.
Same as the new boss.
Yeah, that's the really rare example. Otherwise, a lot of the time, it's like whatever's happening, and people can talk a good game about, oh no, we just want you to keep doing what you're doing and all that. But the truth of it is, there's certain aspects that they're more interested in out of what you currently do than others. Right. So certain areas might end up getting trimmed back, and others might get built up. And so, yeah, anytime there's going to be trepidation, but of course, with the cloud over everything Embracer that there's been for so long, instability and uncertainty was just the prevailing conditions anyway. So presumably to have that resolved in terms of, you're expecting probably some sort of transition to different ownership at some point for that to happen. And for it to be, certainly a company that you can be very confident is not going to be going insolvent anytime soon. It is in a position where, it's looking to staff up for, something as major as a console transition and so forth. I would have thought that would be reassuring to quite a number of people.
Yeah. Like just the stability in it. Nintendo is known as being a pretty decent place to work historically. I know there's been some stuff lately.
Well,
the
contract work, yeah, that's the thing. It's sadly, it seems like again that's something that's a kind of an easy way out a lot of the time, it would seem like, for a company to kind of treat people who are on contract work not very well.
Yeah, I mean, the parts about in that conversation, and I don't want to get too deep into that, where it's like they let people go who are on contract work. That is kind of why contract work exists. Like, it's actually more expensive to have a contractor usually. And I say this because I've been involved in these conversations, because usually you pay them more per hour. Now, you don't pay them benefits, but that can come out in the price. Like, we've had contractors who get paid a lot of money, like a lot of money per hour, and they get overtime, which I definitely don't get overtime. I get paid 40 hours a week if I work 40 hours a week, or if I work 100 hours a week, or if I work 30 hours a week. That's being salaried, man. That's how it goes. But they, that the ability to let them go is the trade-off that comes with that. And I've known contractors who are like, yeah, I take that risk because I get paid so much money. And I've known ones who desperately want out of that game, and it's tough, especially if you've got a lot of them. But these won't be contractors; these are employees, and congratulations, you've joined the club, as it were. I'd imagine the assets they'll have access to will be dramatically improved as well, because they're going to have direct first-party access to hardware and to code bases and to tooling. Like, their job is going to get easier as a consequence of this, because they're like, before they were an outside party who Nintendo may have treated better because they knew they were involved in a lot of Warner Brothers ports, and that's an important relationship, and they may have gotten better than average treatment, but now they're part of the family. Like, they're going to have, like I mentioned, they're going to have the phone number of people at Retro they can just call and go, hey, we're playing Metroid Prime 4. How did you make the big giant 4 glow so nice? And get that answer. And probably get that answer pretty fast, which is going to be useful for all kinds of stuff. And like, there's definitely going to be internal communication channels they're going to get to join now and have access to information they didn't have before, and be able to raise issues. Like, if they run into an issue with middleware, they'll be able to report it directly to the person who wrote the middleware. Hey, I see a thing. You guys need to deal with this. They're going to be able to sit a little bit prettier in the work they do, and they're going to be a little more efficient. They're going to have a little bit better tools, and yeah, they might get stuck with some new responsibilities, like being the point contact for third-party relations or something. But, Nintendo just hired... Didn't they just hire Gio Corsi about third-party relations like a month ago? As they're slowly assembling the old Dave Lang's old studio staff, minus Dave Lang over at Nintendo of America. So there is a certain amount of it does feel like Nintendo's also getting ready, because they have a system that's going to be able to have more third-party ports on it than the Switch currently does. And they want to make sure the tooling is there to make that happen. Like, this might have just been happenstance, but it was probably a really good move for all parties involved that this happened. Embracer gets it off their balance sheet. There might still have been debt associated with it that Nintendo took on, which is trivial for Nintendo. The employees there are likely in a more stable position. Certainly they're with a more stable company. And they're going to have access to things they could probably only have dreamed of before. There's going to, once all the ink dries, they're definitely going to have, the highest tier dev kit for the new system in their studio if they don't have it already. That'll show up pretty damn fast, just so they can start getting ready with it. And Nintendo gets a studio with, 100 team members that's already we've talked about this before, that sometimes an acquisition is because it's cheaper to buy a studio than build one from scratch. Building a 100-person studio from scratch would have been very expensive. So if they got this on the cheap, it may have actually been even bigger savings than we realize. And yeah, they now have a new resource in North America that is, primarily English speaking, that is going to be able to work with third-party publishers and developers to help them get products on the new system. And that's a big win. That's a big asset, because NST can only go so far. And like I said, I strongly doubt the other Nintendo in North America studios were available. I do wonder if we're hitting a tipping point where Nintendo of America might name an executive position that oversees those studios. because, we've talked about it in the past that Retro still answers to, like, Tanabe, or, well, they used to. I don't know if they still do. Having somebody who's like a VP level position that's in charge of studios does feel like at this point might be a valid activity to do. But, that's just a management exercise. But it does feel like now they've got, they're probably approaching 500 or 600 developers in North America. Like, it's not an insignificant heft of their company at this point, which is kind of shocking. Not something I would have ever anticipated 20 years ago. So, it might also be a recognition that the game is internationalizing in a way that even they can't really avoid. Like, I sat through the credits of Star Wars Jedi: Survivor on Monday. The credits are 42 minutes long. 42 goddamn minutes. They're so long. And it's not like one name creeping by at a time. It's just that game has 1 million people in studios in every continent except Antarctica and Australia. Like, just studio after studio after studio is coming across. There are 2 distinct symphony orchestras in 2 countries that recorded music for this fucking game. Like, at some point, like, there's studios in, like, Bucharest and in the UK and in North America and in China. It's just place after place. Like, Nintendo does have to, even if they are more efficient in their development and build games that aren't that, there is a realization that having the ability to develop internationally has advantages that maybe they can start to realize. And there are disadvantages as well, obviously. Having everybody in the same building or in 2 buildings is really nice sometimes. I know because I've lived it. I've also lived development team distributed throughout the country and throughout the world. I've dealt with that too. There's advantages, there's disadvantages, and maybe they're getting to a place now where, like, hey, we've got enough studios in North America that we can start treating them as a unit. I don't think they'll ever rename them into, like, Nintendo of America Development Division 1 or some bullshit. But they probably could, and there's probably some advantage there, and they might onshore some management resource and give some more independence to that group. That's not a very Nintendo thing to do, but they've let Metroid Prime 4 go for like 47 years, so I guess they're letting somebody do whatever they want.
Yeah, again, it's we say this all the time about Metroid Prime, but we shouldn't know. Yeah, stuff like this goes on, but we don't know. Because they never show a logo, they never let us see a big glowing 4. Yeah, so it's like that part of it is not as extraordinary as the fact that it's something the public knew about. That's the bit that's really extraordinary, and that is because of the woes of their performance with Wii U, and the kind of trying to give people any reason to, try and hang on for, what Nintendo's stuff was going to be in the future, and the whole awkward kind of bungling of Federation Force. It's a very unique intersection of circumstances that produce this thing where about a project that then, entered, very tumultuous kind of development experience, shall we say. We'd be naive to think that there weren't other projects that go through similar fits and starts and, developer transitions and all and may never see the light of day, may just get outright, shelved. But again, that would be stuff that's just entirely out of the public view.
Yeah, and we hear about some of them occasionally when things leak out, but like 2019, Shinya Takahashi did that YouTube video that said Retro has restarted development. This is after 2018, where Reggie Fils-Aimé said that Metroid Prime 4 was proceeding well and well into development, which, again, he said that in 2018, and in January they're like, "Nah, Retro restarted that whole project."
Again, this is it again. What you never want to put yourself in that position where you have things that are just manifestly contradictory in the public sphere in such a relatively short period of time.
It's like, hey, Actually, we lied. My bad. Yeah, I mean, this is, anything else we'd say is really just pontificating. But like, good for these people that they're gonna have a job. That's probably.
I mean, I don't really think this should be considered like some sort of feel-good story in a lot of ways, but in the backdrop of the sort of bloodbath of everything else that's going on, I mean, relatively, I guess it kind of is.
Yeah, and I don't know that this is going to result in them producing new products. It doesn't really seem like that's their MO, but it does potentially mean that Switch's successor will get some third-party products that it might not have gotten otherwise. And that should be exciting if you want to own that system, because whatever it ends up being, which we don't know at this moment, because that means there will be at least maybe one or two more games per year or two available for the system that might not have been otherwise, or maybe it will be done better than it would have been done to begin with. And that's cool, but it might also help facilitate other products being made by their original development studio or by a partner studio to come out better. And that's, to me, that's what's more interesting, is that we could end up with better products because there's a team who's inside Nintendo whose job it is to port third-party games, who can offer more expertise than anybody else could previously, because those studios were all talking about from the context of being a Nintendo game first and being made for Switch rather than porting something that was not a Nintendo game first. So it's a new context Nintendo will have, and also new voices inside Nintendo who will be able to say, like, hey, as somebody who's ported stuff from this architecture to our architecture, here's a real deficiency in the tooling you've got available. Is there anything we could do to make that better? Like, opportunities to learn are in play here. Speaking of opportunities to learn, Intellivision Amico, everyone's favorite project. And by everyone, I mean no one's. News on the Amico front this week, which is not a phrase I thought I'd ever get to say again, and I'm not sure I'm happy about it. Atari, which again, I don't even know what the fuck Atari is at this point. It's a holding company, I assume.
I heard they own Infogrames. I mean, they must be major.
That's right. Infogrames owns Atari, owns Infogrames owns. It's the fucking worst. It's the worst. Atari this week announced that they have acquired Intellivision. Why?
Finally settling the score from the early 80s.
I don't know.
It's the same people. They've had a grudge the whole time. It's all very important.
Because the funny thing is, like, they've acquired all of Intellivision's back catalog, which would be funny if it wasn't for the fact that a lot of Intellivision's back catalog are clones of Atari games.
You're next, Connecticut Leather Company.
Yeah, fuck you, Coleco.
We're finally going to settle a score with all of
fuck you. So this is one of those, like, I'm reading this news, and then I read it again, and then I get pinged on Discord 3 or 4 different times because everyone's like, well, James needs to know about this. As if I'm not already completely in the loop because I'm fucked in the head. But part of the announcement was that they are going to continue to allow the development of the Amico under license, including the software.
I like the word allow in that sentence. I feel like that's right what we call a low-bearing word in that sentence.
I may have inserted that word. Let me make sure I get the wording exactly right.
It feels right. It feels right. It's like
it does.
We shouldn't allow it, but we're going to because we're just generous souls. I don't know.
This is a. All right, I'm going to give you the IGN headline because I feel like they're editorializing here, and I'm not comfortable with it. Atari acquires Intellivision brand, but leaves disastrous Amico console behind. It's like, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair because to be a disaster, it has to be tangible. It has to be cardboard.
Theoretical disaster, hypothetical disaster, Schrodinger's cat disaster. What do you want to say?
I don't know. It's non-cardboard at this point. the entity that it remains. So Atari bought the license and the 200 game portfolio, which I'm stunned there's 200 games in that portfolio, but sure, fuck it. The remaining Intellivision Entertainment LLC will rebrand to a different name entirely and continue to develop the Amico console. Quote, "This was a very rare opportunity to unite former competitors and bring together fans of Atari, Intellivision, and the golden age of gaming." Who the fuck thinks the Atari 2600 was the golden age of gaming? Yeah, that's it. That's the era. Like, no one thinks that. Oh my god, this is fucking nonsense shit. This is Wade Rosen, who I believe is younger than the last Atari game, who's the CEO of Atari at this point. The whole thing is insane. The Amico was announced in 2018 with a 2020 release date, though several mishaps saw incidents, please, stop editorializing, delayed it indefinitely. They eventually admitted in November 2023 it didn't have money to continue development. It released a mobile application version in the meantime to secure funds, though its deal with Atari is likely another way of doing so. Atari will use the Intellivision brand and game rights to expand its digital and physical distribution of classic games and potentially create new ones. It will explore brand and licensing opportunities as part of the long-term plan to create value from Intellivision properties. What, you mean like Tommy selling posters of Intellivision box art wasn't creating value? Which was a thing that their website was doing for a while? Oh god, this is so much. This is so much.
It kind of feels because they did retro Intellivision collections decades ago that were called Intellivision Lives. It feels it's a shame they've burned that already because it kind of feels more appropriate now.
Yeah, Intellivision Lives. The Verge describes it, originally scheduled to launch in 2020. It was once headed up by, quote, prolific, end quote, video game composer Tommy Tallarico. I love the shade they're just throwing in his composition history. Like, he's prolific. It's like, I mean, yes, he is. Like, whether or not he's claimed the composition of games he didn't compose for, he's still prolific. You don't need to throw air quotes on there. Jesus Christ. But I assume this means we'll get a digital Calypso Intellivision product at some point. That'll be good.
Yeah.
That'll be neat. And then you can see how fucking trash Atari sports games were compared to their Intellivision counterparts. I mean, just embarrassingly different. Which is why they had, what's his name, do all those ads for them. Which is this real, like, 80s video game console war ads are stupid in ways you can't imagine. It's like, what if we just get this professional spokesman to stand between two big, ugly CRT TVs on a black background and just go like, does this look like football or does this look like football? Intellivision football, available at Sears. And it's the end of the ad. It's like, what the fuck was that? So yeah, we're going to get a bunch of those ads on a Intellivision Lives 2025 from Digital Eclipse, and I'm pumped. I'm pumped for that. But yeah, they're going to continue to allow Amico to exist for some reason, for no reason, for none reasons. But here's hoping. Here's hoping the Amico comes out so you can continue to invest in the success. Remember when they bought Intellivision? Like, that was a big deal. Tarico's like, we bought the Intellivision brand, and everybody's like, why? But now they've sold it. It's like Embracer on a very small and very old scale. Speaking of acquisitions in IGN, hey, there's one more. IGN acquired, I can't remember what the name of the company is, but what was the name of the publishing studio?
I think it's Reed Pop, I believe, isn't it?
Yes.
But there's all the Eurogamer and all the associated websites.
Yeah, so that immediately then turned into a bunch of layoffs. Basically, if you were a Reed Pop employee who wasn't in the UK, you were in trouble. So this isn't going to be good. I don't know long term what this means, but it's not a good thing. Is it gonna make there less media opportunities available? Yeah, definitely. Are there gonna be less jobs available in the already strained video game media space. Oh yeah, definitely. But they were looking. ReedPop was looking to sell its digital businesses as long as like 5 years ago. So that doesn't include they own EGX and MCM as well. Those are not involved in the sale. So yeah, this is your Eurogamer. This is a couple other things. It's gonna be a game industry, Eurogamer, Digital Foundry, and some others. So yeah, that could be rough. Also, speaking of the Keeley-verse, somebody put out a note today that Keeley had been interested in buying GameIndustry.biz, which he then later denied. I fully believe it because I believe that man believes he is the GameIndustry.biz. So I'm just going to make that my personal reality, that he did try to buy GameIndustry.biz, which would have been terrible, funny, and amazing, all at the same time. Very eventful news week for end of May. Gotta say, none of it's, I guess one of it's logical. The rest of it's just ridiculous acquisitions bullshit and potentially people losing their jobs, which is always not good. But hey, some people probably had their jobs saved too, so yay. Yeah, the acquisition of the digital content from ReedPop is worrying. The Gamer Network, as I believe they referred to it. I don't know. IGN's not great. That really means there's like 3 companies that specialize in digital video games media at this point. There's IGN. There is the company that owns all the wikis that really, really suck. I'm blanking on what they're called. And I think there's one more. And that's it. Like, there is notable contraction in the large scale video games media format. Obviously it came for the print stuff first because that had the highest cost attached to it, and also it was the most dated. So news wasn't a very effective medium. It's part of the reason why NWR doesn't really do a lot of news anymore. We do some, obviously, but it's hard for us to be timely because you're going to see it on your social media of choice or on like a message board or on a Discord before we get a chance to do it because A, we don't have any paid employees doing news, and B, news happens 24/7. So news doesn't really have as much value and you won't really generate clicks on news unless you're extremely consistent about being first out of the gate with news. And even then these days, I imagine there's not a ton of payoff on it. So it's more about like opinion-based content or creator-based content. And even that, we've seen the market shrink on that. And yeah, people are making money with various services you can like Ko-Fi or whatever, where you can get solicit money from patrons if you're Patreon, but same general idea, or via like Twitch and stuff. But there's a finite amount of money in that marketplace, and I assume there's going to be, as people continue to migrate towards it because their job no longer exists, it's going to be harder and harder to make ends meet for everybody because people are going to have to make choices. It's kind of like the streaming service stuff. So tough times for the video game media as well. But let's move on to something that's a little bit more positive, and that's listener mail. Hey, listener mail. You can send your mail to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That's rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. I did not plan to spend 40 minutes on news, but I guess it happened, so we're just going to get to our email right out of the gate. Gentlemen, did I post the email in the chat? I cannot find the chat to tell you because Skype is a old program. I did post it. No, I didn't. I didn't send it. Now I've sent it. There we go. Okay. There it is. I've sent it now. It's in there. I would like Guillaume to read the first email, if you would please.
Sure. Juan writes, "Hello, Jackpot Jones and his posse.
Fucking hate that shit.
What do you think should be the next evolution for the Metroidvania genre? I get the impression that it's gotten stale and in need of a new approach. How would you create a new spin in the genre? Imagine that you're creating an RFN Metroidvania game. What features would it have?"
What is this show if not auditory retraversal again and again and again?
Well, I mean, the other issue is our memories are fading, so
the loops just get like tighter and more repetitive.
Let's just try to sequence break this.
That happened years ago. I'm pretty sure that happened with John, who is essentially the same age as he was when we started recording. 11,000. So I don't know. Like this is not my genre, even though I talked about a Metroidvania.
Yeah, exactly. You talked about a game that has some of that structure, and that's something I mentioned when I was talking about Animal Well, last week. I think is that part of it is that you could look at it as more of a structure than a genre, and there's I think quite a lot that can be done in terms of maybe trying things, inside that structure. That probably at this point it would be somewhat naive to say haven't been tried at all, because it's something that has been kind of dabbled with by so many kind of like developers, large and small. Absolutely. That they've probably tried it. It's like I played lots of these kinds of games. There's so many that I haven't played. Some I own and I haven't played the Deedlit. You've played this, James?
Oh yeah. And that game's like 6 hours.
Yeah, I just haven't got around to it, whereas like, and then other times like some Animal Well comes along and I think, I'll try that, and I like play it straight away. It's just random kind of stuff. Yeah. But I mean, the point is like, you could think of something like, Yoku, is it Yoku's Island Express? I want to say that it's a pinball. Mm-hmm. In a Metroid structure, I mean, that's the point. If you could now, it's all well and good saying that. It's another thing executing it in a way that both works in a general sense, but also leaves you with the specific feeling of like, yes, I think this imposing it, that structure on it was a net positive, because that can be tricky. I've seen certain games sort of refer to where it's people, reviewers, and just general user feedback of sometimes question like, did this need to be ostensibly a non-linear kind of game, in that Metroid style? Maybe not. I think there was a recent one that was reviewed on NW1, I'm blanking on the name of it now, that was kind of, there was some question about that. And certainly, I mean, I can remember even going back as far as the Vanillaware game on Wii. Is it Muramasa?
Yes.
Like that.
Yeah, that game did not benefit from it.
How did that benefit from it? I mean, would it not have been better as a sort of just a straight up kind of hack and slash game?
Yeah,
probably.
Because traversal in that game was time consuming.
Now, and I think there's a few dimensions that one can look at in that regard, in terms of why is this structure sometimes imposed on a game. And sometimes it might just be because, people have like a passion for that, for games in that genre, and they like excited about the idea of maybe doing something a little bit different with it, and it just doesn't come together. There's also the more practical, shall we say, or you might say cynical way of looking at it, which is sometimes it is done as simply a way of extending a game, right? It's like, okay, we've got essentially this much stuff in the game that is unique, and that doesn't last very long. But what if we kind of chopped it up and like reconfigured it into a kind of, somewhat exploratory kind of structure, so that seeing that content, took longer, and you saw some of it multiple times as you have this retraversal element, and somehow that's going to work out better for us because it's going to have a bigger number when people look it up at howlongtobeat.com or whatever that's called. So yes, there's, if that really is all that you're looking to achieve, is a sort of brute force of, making, reviewers say that it takes longer and trying to, suggest some sort of greater value, then I think the odds are very much against you that you're going to come away thinking it was a net positive.
I think the other part that comes with that is how deep do they put that template in? So in the two Star Wars Jedi games, it's there. like I can't open this door because I don't have the power. I'm going to have to come back to it later. But it's shaded by an almost Xenoblade style, like, I don't know, go wherever the fuck you want. I don't give a shit. And it's just occasionally there's things here to be like, no, I actually care about this part. You can't go here yet. There are components that are optional things of like, hey, if you want this later, you can come back and get it. But there's a lot of stuff where it's just like, no, this is really just to keep you from going where we don't want you to go yet. So, like, even Metroid Prime 3, which is the only one of the Metroid Prime games I beat on the first playthrough, is more that way, where it's like, yeah, this is really just to lock a door. We're not trying to make you remember you're going to have to come back here in 7 hours. You're going to, like, we've put this door in front of you. That's a pretty good indication you're going to be able to open this door in the very near future. Just as a heads up. So, like, how deep you make the idea of you got to remember when to come back and use this, or how much information we provide to you on the map to tell you, like, that's what I actually really think, like, I said it, like, Metroid Prime 4 needs to have a map that's at least this helpful. Now, it's not a great 3D map. I would say it's slightly better than the last revision of the Xenoblade 2 map, which is, better than it was, I guess. But it's, you know, it's not as good in terms of being able to navigate the map as like a Metroid Prime was, but it's also basically an open world space, so that's a lot harder to do. I think applying the template in a truly open world context, like in a Xenoblade X context, has a lot of potential. I think it could also make the game really difficult to navigate because you'd have a hard time remembering. I think you need to have stuff where being able to take notes and make notes to yourself that are not just icons, because I don't remember what I meant those icons to mean, but like actual notes. I can write something down and say, this is the spot it's relevant at. I think that would be really useful as a nice little evolution. Like, I think the trick is, how do you generate that sense of discovery of, oh, wait, I have this thing. I can go use it now, and I get to see a cool new thing as a consequence.
And it's the kind of twinning of discovery and empowerment. That's the kind of the thing, isn't it? Of like, when you do go through things again, it's not merely sort of repetitious or feels like it's, you know, filling, you know, time to meet some quota somewhere. It's different in some way, the experience, because you're more powerful, and you know, there's some sort of satisfaction in that, right? It's like, oh, I remember when this stretch was, you know, tricky, right? I had to carefully kill the enemies. I had to carefully platform. Now I can kill them with ease. I can somersault over everything in a way that's still fun rather than trivial. And all these things are really quite difficult to balance, and will certainly, the impression of whether it falls on one side of that line or the other will vary according to, you know, individual players quite a lot, obviously. So, you know, it's always been tricky, and it's always been, you know, kind of a fair bit of kind of variation in exactly what you want to put in it. You know, the two, you know, main kind of things that people think of as popularizing the genre, Metroid and Castlevania. Like, Castlevania did it quite differently in a lot of ways, you know, like, because there's so much of that game, and I've said it many times, it's one of the things I like least about them, as much as I do like the Castlevanias of that sort for the most part, where it's just corridors. You know, and it's not like corridors with, like, you know, again, intricate platforming, or it's just like, here's a corridor and here's a bunch of a certain type of enemy, or, you know, a couple of types of enemies, or whatever it is. You know, and that to me always diminished the sense of empowerment in those games versus Metroid, because it was just like, okay, yeah, there's still a bit, because you're a higher level and you may well kill those enemies a lot quicker, but that's such a kind of, get brute force, a very sort of simple way of doing it, that it doesn't have that kind of, illusion it doesn't present the kind of illusion of greater empowerment with the same elegance as when it's done, to my satisfaction. But, it still works, I think. It's just, it feels a bit more kind of simple. It feels a bit more kind of obvious up front, by comparison. But that's the thing. There's always been sort of, I feel like, ebbs and flows with this genre up until now, at least, in terms of, we got to a period where, the Castlevania ones were coming out all the time and people got kind of blasé about it. And then they went away.
Right.
And I mean, and also similar with Metroid, right? It's like, well, we went from Super Metroid to Fusion, and it was quite a few years. And then you had the Metroid Prime games as well and Zero Mission. And then they went away for quite a while. And so, those two series certainly kind of waxed and waned. I guess the point is now with indies, taking them up, as well as, major projects like Prince of Persia that I already talked about. And I think it was Tales of Zenara, I want to say, was the game I was thinking of earlier, that I think EdWR gave it quite a favourable review. Neil reviewed it. But other reviews I saw did mention the question of, like, they like the narrative and other aspects, but they question whether it might have actually been better outside of the Metroid structure, which is, it's kind of, and like I said, that's not the only game I can think of that, being mentioned, but, it's kind of interesting when, people do, because it's a valid question, it's like, is this the best sort of, delivery mechanism for the story and the gameplay ideas you actually want to convey to the player?
Yeah, I talked about it last week when I was really more focused on the Souls mechanics that show up in Star Wars Jedi. It's like, do they make the game better? And I think it's debatable sometimes. It's like, sometimes it just feels like it's an obnoxiousness that they've thrown in there. Whereas a game with more traditional checkpoints, like, oh, I failed this fight, whatever, I'm going to start back outside the room and we're going to do the fight again. The same thing applies here, where like they're fairly light-handed with the content, so it works out. But if they had been heavier handed with it, I would have had that same question of, like, does it make sense? I think it actually, I think it actually shows up more in the fights than anything. Because enemies that used to be scary are now, like, I'll either just jump and dash past them and be like, whatever, boss. Or I'll be able to just auto deflect their stuff. Or I'll just put them down quickly and that's the end of it. And that's kind of what I would want. Like, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of this genre in its purest form. I've played through a bunch of them. I enjoyed Hollow Knight for what it was, but I didn't love it like some people seem to. I'm not going to respond to every single Nintendo announcement of, is this the time we're going to see Silk Song? Because I actually don't care that much. I don't fucking care. I actually am rooting against it showing up in every direct because I want to see it again.
I understand the impulse from the point of view, mate, that the clamour for it may have grown tedious if you're exposed to that routinely, but it shouldn't. You got to separate that from the people actually making the game.
I'm not suggesting I want them to have difficulty making the game come out. I want that game to come out when they're ready. But I'm actively enjoying what it's like. Silk Song's definitely this time, and I'm like, no, no, it's not. There is a delight in that, especially when they're like, this is going to focus on small games from our partners. And like, it's Silk Song. It's like, no, it obviously isn't Silk Song. Go away. I mean, we had this with Smash too, where they were responding to the Indie World Showcase with, is there going to be a Smash announcement? They should have just said yes. They should have just responded yes. This is why I couldn't work in social media. I would have just said yes. I'd have said, oh yeah, big one. You should definitely pay attention to the end. I'd just be like, fuck it. I don't care. Whatever. I'm going to drum up some ratings.
So I like, in theory, the Metroidvania genre. There used to be a time when I would look forward to any new Metroidvania game because they were so rare, as we've already said. These days, I think that I'm a little bit more discriminating, because it's an easy genre to just not do super well. And I feel like it's a fine line between like the ones that are really great and the ones that are well designed by professionals. You know, like it's so easy to just make one that's by the numbers, and I guess that's the one thing that I want those games to avoid. I'm not sure if I agree that they're stale, but I definitely agree that there's a lot of them and that they're not all great, you know, whereas like by almost by default, back when there were so few of them, they were almost necessarily great because we didn't have a whole lot of
just they were more
points
impactful,
of comparison,
weren't they? You know,
Yeah.
because it's like you could have these periods where, and especially for somebody like me, like I bought relatively few games, because it was expensive, or they would be bought for me, because I was that young. Like back when I didn't play Symphony of the Night because, like I was 12 when that game came out, and I wasn't going to be able to buy, a PlayStation on the side from, what my parents were providing with the N64 import stuff. Like, so, even what was available, I didn't get all of it, and so when one did come along on a system that I had, and it was, obviously, say something like Metroid Fusion, I think it's very good. I like it a lot. It's less exploratory than some of the other Metroid games, but I think what it actually tries to do, it's very effective at. But, for all its, I think, very real merits, some of how much I enjoyed that game was definitely just like, I haven't played something like this very often. There was Circle of the Moon at launch, but, that was a little bit different even than some of the other Castlevania games of the sort. So, and that's just, you're never going to get that again because, the games aren't as expensive. There's just way more of them and so on.
The one thing that they could do to be better would be to be Super Metroid and to be the game that I'm playing for the first time. Like the game that introduces me to this genre, basically. But yeah, as Greg was saying, you can't have that again. So anyway,
so what you're saying is, my idea here, since I think we should get to the heart of the question, is what do I want to see the Metroidvania template applied to? And I think the answer is racing games. I want to unlock new powers in my car that let me explore the track in new directions. And you think, James, you're just being a jackass and making up stuff. And my answer to that is yes, but also Forza Horizon, where I get powers and I actually can get to areas of the map that are harder to get to otherwise. But I want that in a more full sense, whereas literally I could not get here before. Xenoblade X kind of does that with the scales. Like, as you get a scale and as your scale gets upgraded, there are places you previously could never get to.
That was a pretty profound sense of empowerment, I gotta say.
Oh, yeah.
For a game that's not really, in that structure at all, because it's so, like I said, for me, the quintessential Metroid type experience is the illusion of exploration more than the reality of it, whereas like Xenoblade X is very much the reality of it.
Go wherever the fuck you want. I'm not even going to tell you.
But the hours involved to get the scale at all, and then for it to get the flight module or whatever, like it's when you get to that point and it's like, God, this journey or this kind of place was so far off and it took such a time, and now you're doing this, like it really has one of the more memorable like feelings of like God mode getting turned on, essentially.
Oh yeah,
which is for like 2D Metroid type experiences at this point is definitely got a lot harder because you've been through that like so many times.
Even like, hey, I'm now as tall as the Gogles, who have been absolutely beating my face in every time I run into them because they're giant apes. Now I'm as tall as they are because I'm in a Skell. I'm gonna wreck this thing's face, and then your Skell gets blown up and you realize the game has insurance that you can buy because the military charges its team insurance for their own equipment. It's fucked up, man. But yeah, I mean, putting that template into a large scale world is obviously really difficult. And I could see just playing Jedi Survivor where like it struggled with that because it was trying to make a world that really wasn't as open as Xenoblade X, because you'd be hard pressed to do that. but apply those mechanics into it. And a lot of times just ended up being the store is locked, the power you don't have. But Metroid's guilty of that too. Metroid's guilty of lots of... There's nothing really here that's asking anything of you. You just have to have the right key to open this door. Sorry. And that key just happens to be a blaster. So there's some of that here too. But there are just straight up like, this platforming challenge isn't possible. And there's no real indication as to what could make it possible, but there's definitely a thing here that looks weird and I can't interact with it yet. I bet I can later. And sure enough, yes, you can.
Yeah, and I guess empowering. Like one of the things about Metroid is that it kind of how can I say this? Like it doesn't tip its hand, but like it's very obvious sometimes that like, well, there's this type of block, and so I can't do anything about this type of block for now, but I will be able later. Like this is a super missile block, I guess, but I don't have the super missiles yet, and that's why I used to love Metroidvanias, but I think that one genre has supplanted them, and that would be for me, and that's the side-scrolling 2D action
Brawlers.
RPG. Well, sure, but more like I'm thinking like the latest one of this genre that I played that I really really loved was Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom. Like it is Metroidvania-ish because usually you've got this big world and like little by little you can venture further into various parts of it. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is other than, especially in that game, like the answer obviously isn't always obvious. Like here's the locked door and you need its key, like I feel like that genre will dare to add other types of puzzles that are just neat to have. Like they add a nice variety. Like there will be like cryptic statues that you can do something about, but you don't know what yet. You'll have I don't know, any sorts of weird crap like that. And I would almost include something like Tunic in that genre. It's not side-scrolling 2D, but it is definitely like this kind of like, can unraveling a mystery be a genre? Like that's what those games feel like.
I think it's something the structure of Metroid has always like meshed really well with, is this kind of feeling of almost being like not necessarily explicitly so, although there's been some games that where that kind of is happening, of like almost being an archaeologist, right? And it's like you are finding out about this world as you progress through it, and you're kind of piecing things together. And again, there's definitely some of that feel with Animal Well, even though it's like very surreal and inscrutable. It's kind of like, there's enough things that kind of relate to each other in the weird stuff that you see that you can almost try and piece together. Like, okay, is there something in particular that an inference to be drawn here? And again, how kind of overt or kind of implicit you want to be with these, that's got up to developer choice. I think it's something that you can do. Obviously, I kind of like the less wordy version of it. But I think there's value in sometimes when you have a lot of lore, because, with Metroid Prime, or indeed this would be true of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown as well. Like you can have a lot of text that ultimately, like it might be, you might look at it as kind of a blunt instrument, but it can just flat out tell you stuff about the world that, for as nice as like communicating things about the world wordlessly is, it's difficult and it can only tell you so much, right? Like you are limiting yourself to how much you can actually tell at that point. And there's lots of people that do enjoy, the amount of kind of weird detail that goes into things like the logbooks in Metroid Prime and the sort of like piecing together the sort of very bizarre culture of like the space pirates. So like, what the fuck are they doing? Like, just like completely amoral and just like willing to try any batshit experiment that comes into their head about like, oh, we'll try and make a morph ball. Oh, it's just like crushed everyone that we've put into it.
What if I eat Phazon?
Yeah, just all these like dumb ideas and like a little bit of humor and like I said, again, getting a feel of culture and then contrast that with like, the culture of the Chozo or some other like ancient civilization that wasn't a bunch of dumb clowns like marauding.
What if you feed people Phazon? It's very different.
So, I think, that kind of archaeology element, there's different ways of doing it, but again, even within that, but I think it's a cool idea, and I think it just is something that this genre does well. But again, you could marry that to a lot of different types of narrative. It doesn't all have to be like, sci-fi, aliens and experiments and radiation and, whatever. Like, again, obviously, Prince of Persia, does that, pretty well with a very different kind of, storyline, as I already mentioned. So, that's something I like. I mean, I think one of the things that always kind of, and there's probably, again, because there's so many of these types of games now, I'm probably overlooking goodness knows how many things. But I've always thought it was kind of odd that one of the earliest games that had a similar, differences, but somewhat similar kind of structure is Simon's Quest. And it has something where, like, you have this, kind of somewhat open, like Transylvania to explore. But within it, you've got the mansions, which are kind of little, kind of enclosed spaces, where there's then enemies and a boss. And, that is, obviously somewhat like Zelda in a way, with the overworld and the dungeons, but from a side-scrolling perspective. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem with Simon's Quest is just that the mansions are rubbish. Like, I think it's an interesting structure. I think you could do something really good with it. Just Simon's Quest doesn't, because it's like a very early game in that area. And even something like Symphony of the Night doesn't really quite pick up that particular ball and run with it. No. Because it's doing the Super Metroid thing much more. And I just think, whether it would be Castlevania itself, perhaps, or anybody, I'd be interested to see, and again, I'm sure there are games that do this and I just haven't played them, but, like to say, how about, some really, really satisfying linear sections nested inside the Metroid structure. And, I think Metroid itself dabbles with it here, there. For instance, the kind of, what are they called again? The ME sections, the stealth sections in Metroid Dread are a little bit like this, in the sense that it's like, okay, you get to this part of the world and then all of a sudden, you're not at liberty to jump around and explore in the same way, and you've got to have stealth, and it's kind of like it's not exactly one path that you go through to hide from the robot before you can kill it. There's a certain amount of freedom there, but it's kind of like a little linear challenge before you get back to the exploration bit, but it's stealth, it's a little bit different. So I think there's been experimentation in this area, but again, I think it's flexible enough. There's a lot of different like linear challenge type, design types that you could put as sort of carve outs, as little sections inside the these sorts of games. I'd kind of like to see more people do that, and again, you can kind of tie it into that whole empowerment thing that we talk about. That's really, something that Zero Mission did, I think, to make it feel, a little bit less like just going through the motions. Cause obviously it's a lot like Super Metroid, and it's a lot like the original Metroid because it's a remake, but it gives you this one section where it's like, okay, well now you've built up to being pretty much God mode Samus, and then they take it all away and you have to go through this kind of pretty linear section of not being able to just fuck up anything you like. And then you get it back, and it's cathartic because it's like, now everything is dead. Not everything will fall before my feet, and it feels good. It feels like a good, again, it's an illusion. It's sort of all that, but it actually feels empowering again to having lost it for a bit, and that's something that they did there. But there's a lot of different ways you could, I think, have a similar effect in different ways and playing with different elements of different genres that you could put into this structure. You know, it wouldn't necessarily have to be something quite as specific as like pinball, you know, in the case of you know, because Island Express. But I feel like for all the games that are out there must be you know, kind of avenues, you know, to still, if they haven't, you know, literally not been gone down before, that could still yet be explored much more and more fruitfully.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, this is kind of a cop out. Just need to see people who aren't as bound to what has already existed try to apply that template. I mean, you could even argue that the later Xenoblade games are embracing this to some degree with how they lock things behind access to power and access to evolution. It's really more about a feeling than it is like specific rules, I think. Like, yeah, there are certain mechanics where it's like that is part of the thing, but still it feels more like locked doors isn't enough. It's how the doors are locked and how you experience it.
And again, it's how you dress it up, like how you feel. Like when it's like something to do with your locomotion, where it's like, okay, well now I can kind of like do this cool thing that, you know, kind of lets me surpass this obstacle that either was completely insurmountable before or was just tricky and more time consuming to surmount. Like that's what feels good. Like, you know, kind of, again, one of the great things about Zero Mission is just how great the controls are, and then, you know, how great it feels to be able to start doing advanced stuff like kind of, you know, the speed boosting, the shine sparking, to do these like complex, either like to find, you know, unique upgrades that you can't find otherwise with those abilities and by mastering them, or just like traversing the world way quicker than you used to be able to by using those skills. So yeah, that's the essence of it. And you can get to that in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't have to just be screw attack, speed boost, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, you talk about Xenoblade. I mean, some of it is like the way sometimes they put together an environment where, you know, the enemy groupings are such that basically they're creating a path for you in a world where it's like, oh, those things over there are at level 40. I can't, you know, I've got to kind of take the long way to go, you know, to explore this particular part of the map. And then, of course, once you're powerful enough to actually engage with them, you can say, I'm going to walk right through. This is shortest distance between 2 points and they can do nothing about it. Like, that is empowering, right? Isn't it? You know,
yeah.
And that's kind of obvious. It's got a basic thing, but you can tell the way they construct these worlds is very much with that in mind. You know, it isn't just like, okay, here's a big expanse, put the enemies wherever, done. Like, no, that's level design, right? In an RPG, it's actually how these sort of paths are for a lower level player, and then how they change for a higher level player, and then how that's going to feel, how much better it's going to feel.
Or even something as simple as there's a giant Rogul or a giant Rodriguez, which is the name for the gorillas. Like, there's one in Xenoblade 3 that's literally King fucking Kong. He's huge. And he can see you from anywhere, because he's huge.
I love Kaiju Island as well.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so great.
And so, like, there's no safe route, because he can fucking see you from everywhere, because he's huge. So, like, the empowerment isn't you're now strong enough to go toe-to-toe with him, because you're only going to fight him once and then he's dead. It's that you've killed him, and now that route is fine.
Now you've got unfettered exploration, which, you know, you could tie that back into something like Metroid Dread, because there's a real one of the cooler things I think about the ME bits is when you get to re-explore those areas without being pursued by the killer robot. And you've kind of realised the design that went into them. There's two facets to it. There's the first facet for it to work as a stealth section. And then there's the other facet of it, of like, oh, you know, what power-ups are hidden here, or, you know, what sort of nooks and crannies does you explore, or how does this get you to experiment with a new ability you've got to teach you how it improves your locomotion and how you can get through certain spaces more quickly. Like, there's very considered, cleverly constructed stuff going on that when you're doing it right.
Yeah, I think it's really. I think what we're saying is, like, it's really applying these lessons in new and novel ways is what we're looking for. All right. I'm going to read this last email because it's going to be very brief. Spencer writes, James want email, me send email. Please predict the color that's the Switch successor. He says Switch 2, but I don't know. No, it's not its name. Will launch at Thanks for Snow, which I like that we're responsible for the snow. That's excellent, especially now that it was 90 degrees outside today. We're really fucking letting Apple in the snow. We should get back on that.
I guess your powers extend to the southern hemisphere somehow from the northern one.
I guess, yeah. Immense snow generation powers are coming out of Radio Free Nintendo. Gentlemen, what color is the Switch successor going to be?
I could just hear Christian Bale's voice in my head saying, does it come in black? And in this case, Morgan Freeman's going to say, it only comes in black.
Yes. It's the Model T one where it's any color you want as long as that color's black.
Of course, yeah, probably it's going to be black, but in an ideal world, it would be the funniest color that a console can be, indigo.
Okay.
It's a fair point. I mean, they did it. They've done it. We can't say they haven't.
They've done it. But it also came in black.
I mean, shortly thereafter, right? But I mean,
I have a launch day black.
Oh
GameCube.
no, but not in Japan because
not in Japan.
I had a friend who imported a GameCube in September, and he had to have purple. He had no choice in the matter. I got mine in December, which was after the American launch at that point, but it was still a Japanese unit that had been, had the Switch on it to play Japanese or American games, and that I had black, even though I liked Spice better, but it would not have gone with anything in my entertainment setup. So
no, Spice was, yeah, and did Spice ever get a GBA?
That's a good question. I mean,
because they did make multiple colors of the GBA player.
It's funny because they did there was like the prototype GBAs which were white and orange, but
right.
That model never made it out. And then I think wasn't there like a Torchic GBA at some point?
Sure,
but yeah, I don't know about one that was just like a general model.
No, I mean the player.
The player specifically, I think there was one eventually, but I'm not certain.
Because I definitely have a black one of those, but I do recall seeing the indigo. I think, honestly, it'll be black, either black and white like the Switch OLED is, which is actually, you would think it's not very much, but white primary color with lots of black accents is timeless. It's going to look good because white and black go with everything. Like, there's never going to be a time people were like, oh, man, white and black, those colors, so passé. But there might be an option that has a splash of color on it as well. But there's definitely going to be black on that thing. It could be black and gray like the original Switch launch units. I actually think the Switch OLED looks a little bit cleaner with the white, but it's black. The answer is black. All right, so emails. You could send them to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That's rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. 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 I think if I say it in more voices, you might feel like there's multiple voices in your head, and you're losing your grip on reality, and then you'll send emails to try to appease the mind demons. Which is definitely what is asking you for these emails.
So, if you actually play The Exorcist backwards, you'll find that the voices that come out of Linda Blair's mouth are actually saying rfn@nintendoworldreport.com.
Okay, but what if somebody does that and they are? And then we have to end the show at that point, right? Like, we can't record another episode if that's the case. On that, Greg, what is our music to end the show this week?
Well, last week we talked about the fact that in Japan they've had the kind of the one addition to the Switch Online service, the Game Boy part of it that we did not have. For the Frog, the Bell Tolls. So yeah, this is an interesting sort of game that is often sort of cited as a kind of forerunner to Link's Awakening on the Game Boy that only came out in Japan. Although it's kind of made by somewhat different developers, because I think it was a sort of cooperation between R&D1, as we mentioned last week. They were responsible for a great deal of the software that was on Game Boy, especially in those early years, and the intelligence systems. But it kind of has maintained somewhat of a reputation as being, a very interesting kind of Game Boy game that didn't get localized. I think there was a fan translation many years ago at this point. And it was on the Virtual Console in Japan. You could get it for 3DS in that way. And it's made references to it have appeared in other things, like there's a Sith trophy in Smash with the protagonist, and of course it was referenced in Link's Awakening, that came a few years after it, with Richard's Villa. In that game, Richard is a direct reference to the prince, I believe, in For the Frog the Bell Tolls, sort of the protagonist. And so, actually in Richard's Villa, there's a song that plays that's a direct, sort of adaptation of the overworld theme from For the Frog the Bell Tolls. And so I'm going to go with the original, the actual version of that song from For the Frog the Bell Tolls, which is, a fair bit more up-tempo, kind of energetic, a little bit like you might imagine, a Zelda kind of overworld song to be. Although it was, I think this is, Totaka, his work. Actually, and his song is hidden somewhere in the game. It's another one of those where the song is hidden in the game somewhere. I think it's hidden in Link's Awakening too. But yeah, it's a really fun kind of song. Gives you that sense of adventure and everything. So sometimes I think it's kind of just referred to as Overworld, and sometimes referred to as like the Prince's Adventure or whatever. But you probably will have heard the melody before because of Link's Awakening, because of the references to it, but this particular version, maybe not.
All right. Well, on that, it is time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.